What if I told you that your habits were the single most important factor in determining your success as a writer? Would that make you want to change your writing habits? I like to think about the craft of writing a lot, but I think the habits of a writer are equally as important because you're never going to write a book unless you have the habits of a writer, of sitting down and writing and committing yourself to your story. So I want to share with you 10 habits on being a writer from Steve Pressfield and his work, The War of Art. I like what Steve says. He says when we sit down day after day and keep grinding in our writing, a process is set in motion by which divine inspiration comes to our aid. Unseen forces enlist in our cause. Serendipity reinforces our purpose. Power concentrates around us. That's why it's so important we develop the habit of sitting down to write. Habit number 1, the most important thing about art is to work. Nothing else matters except sitting down every day and trying. I think it's easy sometimes to forget that art is work. And Steve says the most important thing is that we sit down every day. We have a habit of working at our writing. And sometimes it's going to feel like we're just trying. It's not going to go very well, but the habit we have to create is sitting down and writing every single day. Steve says there is a secret that real writers know. And that secret is this. It's not the writing that's the hard part. What's hard is sitting down to write. So we have to make sure we do what Steve says and put our ass where our heart wants to be and plunge in. So let me ask you this question. What stops you from sitting down to write? Habit number 2, start before you're ready. Steve talks a lot about having the right mindset in his book, The War of Art. He talks a lot about a concept called resistance, and resistance means anything that is stopping us from doing our writing. So this quote is really good. Start before you're ready really means to me that we have to be winning the battle, preparing our mind the night before we begin to write. The morning when we wake up, we got to be ready to defeat that enemy called resistance that's trying to get us to stop writing. I like to do a couple things in the morning. I like to take a hot shower. I like to make a cup of coffee. I feed a couple stray cats outside our front door. But then I like to get started writing right away because I don't want resistance to gain a foothold. Maybe I might read one article in the newspaper, but after that, I get started writing. So resistance doesn't have a chance to defeat me. Habit number 3, resistance is not a peripheral opponent. Resistance arises from within. It is self-generated and self-perpetuated. Resistance is the enemy within. Steve Pressfield is saying that we are the biggest enemy we face. The resistance he talks about so much comes from within. It's self-perpetuated, it's self-generated, so we have to really be aware of it. That's the main focus of his book, The War of Art, is being aware of all the different forms and manifestations of resistance. Maybe it's that cup of coffee that you want to get in the morning at Starbucks instead of starting writing. Maybe it's the YouTube videos that you're looking at before you begin writing. It's different for every person. I know for me, I do start before I'm ready by really trying to be aware of how much resistance is trying to stop me from writing. This person here, as you can see, is definitely facing resistance. Remember, resistance doesn't come from outside of ourselves, it comes from within ourselves. So we have to be aware of how resistance manifests itself in our lives. Habit number 4, we're never alone. As soon as we step outside the campfire glow, our muse lights on our shoulder like a butterfly. Steve Pressfield is saying a great thing happens when we sit down to write and we overcome resistance. He says that we have every one of us a muse. And when we defeat resistance by sitting down, our muse recognizes that and it comes to our aid. It guides us, it inspires us, and it helps us throughout the creative process. I don't know, the word muse might seem a little ethereal to you, but think about how an idea comes to a writer or a musician, and maybe it's not so odd that divine inspiration would also come along with it to help carry that story or that song out to fruition. Habit number 5, the working artist will not tolerate trouble in her life because she knows trouble prevents her from doing her work. This quote is saying that the artist or writer strives to be drama-free because they know that any kind of drama or trouble in their lives can just trip them up and keep them from sitting down and writing. So they have a really short account with drama. They try not to have any drama whatsoever. I think the worst thing you can do when you're writing is to pick up the phone when someone calls or to respond to a text. You need to kind of shut out the world when you're writing and just concentrate on your story. Habit number 6, the professional knows that fear can never be overcome. He knows there is no such thing as a fearless warrior or a dread-free artist. I think this quote is saying that writing is not easy and that we all have fears. We're never going to overcome our fears. Steve is saying fears are normal, they're a part of the writing process, and basically Steve is saying that we got to learn how to go through them, right? To have the fear, to face the fear, and to learn to be comfortable with it and not let it stop us from writing, but just to be able to go through the fear. I sometimes feel fear when I'm writing, especially when it's maybe a difficult scene. But what I try to remember is how I've made it through other difficult scenes, and those experiences give me confidence that I can make it through this scene. And I try to realize that fear is normal. I just try to go through the fear and not let it immobilize me and paralyze me from writing. Habit number 7. The professional arms himself with patience to keep himself from flaming out in each individual work. One of the things I've been learning as a writer is how important patience is. I feel like the job of a writer is like being a long-distance truck driver. You're starting with a book, chapter 1, you're trying to get to, say, chapter 20. It's going to be a long process. So you got to arm yourself with patience. You have to realize it's not going to be a quick trip. And you just got to have that mindset that you have to have patience through this process. There's a lot of revision, and you have to accept that patience is part of being a writer. Is it hard for you to be patient in your writing? Remember, if you're writing a book, it's a long, long journey. So what I try to do is when I'm revising scenes, I just try to enjoy the process. I enjoy reading what I've written. I enjoy trying to improve those scenes, and I just try to be patient. Habit number 8. The song we're composing already exists in potential. Our work is to find it. I think this is one of the most important habits that a writer has to have. Steve is saying you have to have a belief in your story, a belief in your ability to take that story that's inside of you and to be able to bring that story out. He says you have to find it. So you have to know it's in there, and you have to be patient and just sitting down to write every day. That as you make that commitment, your unconscious will kick in and that story is going to slowly seep out of you. So you got to have a belief in your story. Remember what Steve says, when we sit down to write, unseen forces enlist in our cause. Serendipity reinforces our purpose. There's a muse we have that acknowledges our sitting down and wants to help us and will guide us to get our story out. Habit number 9. The writer is an infantryman. He knows that progress is measured in yards of dirt extracted from the enemy one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time, and paid for in blood. Steve calls writing a battle. Of course, we're battling with ourselves, with resistance. Steve was a Marine, so I think the idea he's encouraging us to have is you have to have that strong mindset where you're fighting. You're sitting down to write, you're trying to move your prose down the page, you're not letting anything stop you. You got to have that grind it out, work it out mentality. Don't give up when things get a little difficult. So yeah, I agree in my experience that there's times when my writing flows and it's kind of coming out, and there's other times when you just kind of have to push and try to move the ball down the field like football, 3 yards in a cloud of dust at a time. I think that's what Steve Pressfield's saying, and I totally agree. That's what it feels like a lot of times for me. Steve says, progress in our writing is paid for with blood. I think what he means there is writing is a lot of hard work, and it's mentally, physically hard, and it's going to extract something from us, but it's worth it. There's a beautiful story that wants to come out of us if we're willing to sit down and do all that hard work to get that story to come out. Habit number 10. The professional dedicates himself to mastering technique, not because he believes technique is a substitute for inspiration, but because he wants to be in possession of the full arsenal of skills when inspiration does come. Yes, I believe we have inspiration that guides us and leads us in our writing, but we need to have technique. We could have all the inspiration in the world, but if we don't have that technique, that story craft that we've been developing and working on as a writer, then that inspiration is not going to really be able to use this to our full extent. So I agree with Steve says. We want to have inspiration, and we want to have at our full arsenal all the story craft and writing ability that we've honed through studying story craft. One thing I've noticed about myself is the more I write, the more I want to study the craft of writing by looking at other writers and reading their stories and seeing what makes their stories work so that I can apply what I learned from their writing to improve my writing. So there's 10 habits on writing from Steve Pressfield. Of course, I think the most important one of all is just having the habit of sitting down to write. You're never going to write a book unless you develop that habit of sitting down every day and committing yourself to your story. And I hope you take away a few tips to developing habits in your writing. As always, I want to thank you for watching, and I want to encourage you to keep on writing. Happy writing, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe.